The Stones of Eternity. How the Great Pyramids Rose from the Desert Sand. A Journey into Ancient Engineering, Stone by Stone. Prologue. The Dream in Stone. Close your eyes and imagine standing in the cool darkness before dawn, somewhere along the western bank of the Nile River, over 4,000 years ago. The air is still and gentle, carrying the faint scent of river water and acacia blossoms. In the distance, barely visible against the deep indigo sky, rises an enormous shape, a mountain built by human hands, its limestone surface catching the first pale hints of morning light. This is Khufu's horizon, the Great Pyramid of Giza. And tonight, as you drift towards sleep, we will walk together through the years of its creation. We will meet the workers who shaped each stone, the engineers who solved impossible problems, and the community that transformed the desert into humanity's most enduring wonder. But we won't rush. There is no hurry here. In this quiet place between waking and dreaming, we have all the time we need to understand how thousands of ordinary people, working with bronze tools and clever minds, accomplished something so extraordinary that it still stands today, outlasting empires, languages, and entire civilizations. Let us begin slowly, gently, at the very beginning, with a single stone. Chapter 1. The first stone. In the 23rd century before the Common Era, during the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom, a young stoneworker named Seneb, though his real name is lost to time, so we'll call him this, stood in a limestone quarry just east of what would become the Great Pyramid's foundation. The sun had not yet reached its full strength, but already the stone beneath his bare feet held warmth from the previous day. Seneb carried a copper chisel, its edge recently sharpened by the expedition's metalworkers, and a wooden mallet worn smooth by countless earlier hands. He was not a slave. This is important to understand, and we'll come back to it again as the evening deepens and sleep draws closer. Seneb was a worker, yes, but one who would receive payment in bread, beer, and onions. His village would be exempt from certain taxes while he labored here. His children would speak with pride of their father's work on the eternal resting place of the God King. The limestone, before Seneb, held a secret that his experienced eye could read. Stone is not uniform, you see. Within each block lies a grain, invisible patterns of weakness and strength laid down when ancient seas covered this land millions of years before any human walked the earth. A good stoneworker learns to see these hidden paths the way you might read familiar words on a page. Seneb knelt slowly, mindfully, and ran his palm across the stone's surface. Smooth, cool, patient. The stone had waited here since before memory. It could wait a little longer. He positioned his chisel at a precise angle along a natural weakness in the rock face. The morning's first strike rang out across the quarry, a clear, sharp note that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. Then another, and another. Not frantically, but with steady, measured rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Around him, dozens of other workers were doing the same, each at their own pace, creating a kind of music. If you listened carefully, you could hear it. The collective sound of bronze on stone, wood on bronze, and occasionally, the deeper crack as a block began to separate from the living rock. This was not a race. The pyramid would take decades to complete. What mattered was steadiness, precision, and patience. These were lessons that the stone itself taught to anyone willing to listen. Chapter 2. Reading the Rock. The limestone cliffs east of Giza held a gift that would make the pyramid possible. Layer upon layer of high-quality building stone formed during the Eocene epoch when all of this land lay beneath a shallow sea. The tiny shells of ancient marine creatures, compressed over millions of years, had become the fine-grained limestone that would face a pharaoh's tomb. But before any stone could be cut, the ancient engineers had to read the landscape itself. Imagine Hemiunu, the architect and vizier responsible for the pyramid's construction. We know his name from his own tomb, where he sits in painted stone, a man of considerable build prosperity, suited a royal architect with an expression of calm competence. Though we cannot know his thoughts, we can trace the evidence of his decisions in the quarry walls that still remain. Hemiunu would have walked these cliffs in the planning stages, perhaps with Khufu himself, studying the way the limestone strata lay exposed by erosion and earlier quarrying. He was looking for consistency layers thick enough to yield large blocks, but without too many flaws or fossil inclusions that would weaken the stone. The limestone here occurred in horizontal beds, each representing a different period of deposition from that ancient sea. Some layers were harder, some softer. Some held awkward inclusions of flint. Others were nearly perfect, fine-grained, strong, and relatively easy to work with copper tools. The Egyptians had discovered something about copper that made their stonework possible, something that seems almost magical when you first learn of it. Pure copper is too soft to cut hard stone effectively, but these ancient metalworkers had learned that by hammering copper, repeatedly work-hardening it, and by adding small amounts of arsenic, they could create tools that, while still not as hard as iron, were hard enough to cut limestone when used patiently and skillfully. Still, copper tools dulled quickly against stone. This meant the quarry needed more than just stoneworkers. It needed a constant supply of sharp tools, which meant metalworkers stationed nearby, furnaces burning charcoal, and a logistics system to bring copper from the Sinai Peninsula hundreds of miles away. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let us return to the quarry face, where the actual separation of stone from mountain began. Chapter 3. The Art of Separation. The sun climbs higher now in our imagining, and the quarry is alive with purposeful activity. Let us watch closely, for this is where theory becomes practice, where the dream of a pyramid begins its transformation into reality. The workers have identified a block. Let us say it will be roughly rectangular, perhaps 2 cubits long, 1 cubit wide, and 1 cubit high. In our measurements, that's about 1 meter by half a meter by half a meter, weighing perhaps 1.5 tons. This is not one of the massive core blocks, but a respectable size nonetheless. The first task is isolation. The block must be freed on all sides before it can be lifted from its bed in the quarry floor. On the top and sides, workers, like our friend Seneb, use their copper chisels to cut channels, narrow trenches that define the block's boundaries. This is patient work. The chisel bites into the stone incrementally, removing small chips with each strike. A channel might be 10 or 15 centimeters wide and needs to be cut as deep as the block's height. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm continues. One worker might spend hours on a single channel, cutting steadily deeper into the stone. There is something almost meditative about this work. The repetition, the focus required, the slow but visible progress. Perfect work for letting the mind drift as sleep approaches. But here's where it becomes interesting. The bottom of the block, still connected to the bedrock, presents a challenge. You cannot easily get underneath it to cut from below. The ancient quarrymen had several solutions to this puzzle, and evidence from unfinished blocks and tool marks suggests they used different methods depending on the situation. One method involved cutting vertical slots at regular intervals along the bottom edge of the block, then carefully working horizontal chisels into these slots, gradually separating the block from below. Slow, yes, but effective. Another method was more ingenious. Once the channels on 3 sides were complete, workers would cut a series of shallow sockets along the base of the block. Into these sockets, they would insert wooden wedges often made from the tough acacia wood that grew along the Nile. Then came the part that seems almost magical. They would soak the wedges with water. Wood, when wet, expands with surprising force. As the water penetrated the acacia wedges, they would swell, exerting tremendous pressure against the stone. Hour by hour, the pressure would build. Sometimes there would be a sharp crack, the sound of stone surrendering to patient force. Sometimes the separation happened silently, invisibly, discovered only when workers tested the block and found it loose. This technique, using the natural properties of materials, water and wood, to overcome the strength of stone, appears throughout ancient Egyptian construction. It speaks to a deep understanding of the natural world, a willingness to work with natural forces rather than against them. Let us imagine the moment when the block finally separates. The workers would have felt it a subtle shift, perhaps a settling. They would test it with levers, feeling for movement, and then success. The block rocks slightly, separated at last from the stone matrix that had held it for millions of years. But the block is not yet ready. Its bottom surface, broken free from the bedrock, would be rough and uneven. This needs to be addressed, but not here in the quarry. For now, the block must begin its journey to the building site. Chapter 4. The journey begins. Picture the late afternoon in the quarry now. The fierce heat of midday has passed, and work continues in slightly cooler air. Our block has been freed, but it lies in the bottom of a channel cut into the quarry floor, perhaps a meter or more below the level where sledges can access it. The problem of lifting is as old as construction itself, and the Egyptians had become masters of mechanical advantage. The simplest lever is just a strong wooden beam, perhaps acacia or imported cedar from Lebanon, placed over a fulcrum. The workers would position such levers under the edge of the block, with stone fulcrums nearby. Then, coordinating their effort with a simple call and response work song. The rhythm of work song serves not just to coordinate effort, but to make hard labor bearable. Another thing worth remembering as you settle deeper into rest. They would press down on the long end of the lever. The block would shift, rise slightly. Quickly, another worker would slide a stone into the gap beneath it. Then the process would repeat on another side. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the block would rise higher, supported by an increasingly complex arrangement of stone shims and wood supports. This is not fast work, but remember, there is no hurry. The pyramid will take 20 years to complete. What matters is that it's done correctly, safely. A crushed worker helps no one. A damaged block represents wasted labor. Eventually, after perhaps an hour or more of careful leverage and shimming, the block would sit at the right height. Now, workers could maneuver a sledge beneath it. These sledges were simple but effective. Heavy wooden platforms with upward curving front runners, not unlike a sled for snow, but designed for sand and stone. The block would be carefully lowered onto the sledge, positioned for balance. Then ropes twisted from plant fibers or papyrus, tested to ensure they could bear the strain, would be attached to the sledge's front. And now comes one of the most distinctive images of Egyptian construction, preserved in tomb paintings and reliefs: the human-powered hauling teams. Chapter 5. The haul. Imagine a rope as thick as your wrist, made of hundreds of individual fibers twisted together with expert skill. The rope extends from the sledge, across the quarry floor, and into the hands of perhaps 20 or 30 men arranged in rows. These haulers are not random workers grabbed from the street. They're organized into crews, groups that work together regularly, that have developed the coordination needed for this work. Some tomb inscriptions mention crew names: the Enduring Gang, Friends of Khufu, the Vigorous Gang. These names speak to a sense of identity and pride in their work. A foreman stands to the side, watching, ready to call the rhythm. In front of the sledge, one worker has perhaps the strangest but most important job. He pours water on the sand ahead of the runners. This detail, preserved in a tomb painting at Jehutihotep's tomb, where we can see a worker standing on the sledge pouring liquid ahead of it, is absolutely crucial. Recent experiments have confirmed what the ancient Egyptians understood intuitively. Wet sand provides dramatically less friction than dry sand. When sand is dry and loose, the sledge runners sink into it, creating enormous resistance. But sand with the right amount of moisture, not soaked, but damp, becomes firmer and allows the runners to glide much more easily. The difference is substantial. Wetting the sand can reduce the pulling force needed by nearly half. The foreman calls out. The haulers lean into their ropes. The sledge resists for a moment. Static friction is always greater than moving friction and then suddenly yields, sliding forward across the dampened sand. They settle into a rhythm. Not fast, perhaps one step every 2 or 3 seconds. The journey from quarry to building site might be only a few hundred meters, but with frequent pauses to rest, to adjust the load, to add more water to the sand, it might take hours. But listen to the pace of it. Steady, measured, the kind of rhythm that could lull you to sleep. One step, another step. The creak of rope fibers taking strain, the scrape of wood on sand, the sound of breathing synchronized. This is work, yes, but it's also almost a meditation, a communal effort that requires everyone to move together to share the burden. Let your breathing match theirs for a moment. In and out, in and out. Steady, patient, like the pyramid itself, built breath by breath, stone by stone. Chapter 6. The Foundation. While our block makes its slow journey to the building site, let us shift our attention to the foundation itself. For this is where Himyunu's genius truly showed. The Great Pyramid covers an area of approximately 13 acres. That's more than 50,000 square meters. Or to put it another way, enough space to comfortably fit 8 modern football fields. And across this entire enormous area, the foundation needed to be level and true. How level? Modern surveys using laser equipment have found that the base of the Great Pyramid is level to within just a few centimeters across its entire extent. The 4 sides, each measuring approximately 230 meters, are oriented to the cardinal directions north, south, east, west, with an accuracy of about 3 arc minutes. That's extraordinarily precise for any construction, let alone one built before the invention of magnetic compasses or telescopic instruments. The foundation itself is not simply the desert bedrock, though that provided the starting point. The ancient engineers first had to deal with the natural irregularity of the Giza Plateau. The plateau here slopes slightly from northwest to southeast. Simply building on this uneven surface would have resulted in a tilted pyramid. So, the solution was to create an artificial platform, cutting down higher areas and building up lower ones until a level plane was established. Evidence suggests they used water as a leveling tool, a technique both elegant and practical. Imagine a grid of shallow channels cut into the bedrock, connected so they could be filled with water. Water, of course, always finds its own level. By marking the water level at various points across the foundation area, the engineers could map the highs and lows with great accuracy. Then came the work of actually leveling, cutting down high spots in the bedrock, and in some areas laying courses of large stones to create a level base in areas where the bedrock was too low. This foundational work was hidden beneath the pyramid itself, invisible to casual observers, but absolutely critical to the structure's stability. Consider what this required. Surveying across a 13-acre area, coordinating teams of workers in different sections, ensuring that cuts and fills were done to precise specifications, and constantly checking and rechecking the levels. All of this before the first course of the pyramid proper could even begin. There's something deeply restful about imagining this work. The careful measurement, the patient removal of stone, the sound of water trickling through channels cut in bedrock, glinting in the sunlight. The foundation took months or even years to prepare, but when it was done, it was right. And because it was right, the pyramid built upon it has stood for over 4,000 years. Let us pause here for a moment. Feel how solid the ground beneath you is. The ancient workers felt the same solidity beneath their feet as they completed the foundation and prepared to build upward. Everything that came next would rest on this careful, invisible work. Chapter 7. The Core. Now the building can truly begin. Our block has arrived, one of thousands upon thousands that will form the pyramid's core. These inner blocks don't need to be pretty. They won't be seen once the pyramid is complete. What matters is that they're solid, stable, and properly positioned. The first course goes down directly on the leveled foundation. This is nervous work. These initial stones will bear the weight of everything above, so their placement must be perfect. But the workers are experienced now. They've prepared for this for months or years. They know what to do. A team maneuvers the block into approximate position. It's still on its sledge, too heavy to simply lift in place by hand. But here's where levers come into play again. Long wooden beams used as pry bars, workers coordinating their efforts to shift the massive stone centimeter by centimeter. One side needs to come up slightly. Levers slip underneath, workers put their weight on the far ends, and the stone tilts up. A shim slides into the gap. The process repeats on another side. Slowly, carefully, the block is shifted into its exact position, tested against strings that mark the course's alignment, checked for level, using simple but effective tools, perhaps a wooden A-frame with a plumb bob hanging from its apex, or a flat board with a channel cut in its surface to hold water. The water's level showing whether the stone sits true. When the block is positioned correctly, when it's level and aligned, it's lowered onto its final resting place. The stone has completed its journey from quarry to monument. It will move no more until the distant day when archaeologists might study it. But multiplying this process by hundreds of thousands of blocks, you begin to understand the challenge. The Great Pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million blocks of stone. Even if workers placed one block every 5 minutes in ambitious pace, working 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, it would still take years just to place the stones, let alone cut them, transport them, and prepare them. This is why estimates suggest the Great Pyramid took 20 years to complete, not because the workers were slow, but because the work was genuinely immense, and because much of it couldn't be rushed. Stonework requires patience. You cannot bully stone into place. You must work with it, understanding its weight, its balance point, its subtle characteristics. As the first course goes down, row after row of blocks creating a vast square platform, the pyramid begins to exist not just as a plan or a dream, but as a physical reality. Walk across that first course in your imagination, hundreds of blocks stretching away in every direction, so precisely placed that you could barely fit a blade between them. This first course alone contains enough stone to build several modern houses, and it is just the beginning. Chapter 8. Rising. Level by level. Now comes the question that has fascinated people for millennia. How did they raise the stones higher as the pyramid grew? A pyramid is, in many ways, its own enemy. As it rises, it becomes increasingly difficult to add more stones. The blocks must be hauled not just horizontally now, but also vertically, up the pyramid's growing slope. And unlike the foundation, where workers had firm ground to stand on and plenty of room to maneuver, the pyramid's sloping sides become progressively narrower work surfaces as the structure rises. The ancient Egyptians left us no detailed construction manuals, no step-by-step guides. What we know comes from archaeological evidence, experimental archaeology, careful reasoning, and the traces left in the structure itself. Several methods were probably used in combination, adapting to different stages of construction. Let us explore these methods gently, one by one, imagining how each might have worked. The straight-on ramp. The simplest solution is a ramp, a sloped pathway leading from ground level up to the current working level. Build a ramp of rubble, sand, and perhaps wooden supports, and you can haul sledges up it just as you hauled them across the desert floor. For the lower courses, this works beautifully. A ramp with a gradient of about 110 rising 1 meter for every 10 meters of length is manageable for hauling teams. To reach a height of 10 meters, you'd need a ramp 100 meters long. Long, yes, but feasible. But here's the problem. As the pyramid rises higher, a straight ramp becomes increasingly impractical. To reach the pyramid's summit at 146 meters, maintaining a reasonable gradient, you'd need a ramp well over a kilometer long. Such a ramp would contain more material than the pyramid itself, and it would all have to be removed afterwards. So the straight-on ramp probably worked for the initial courses, perhaps the first 20 or 30 meters. But then, the builders needed other solutions. The spiral ramp. Imagine instead a ramp that wraps around the pyramid itself, spiraling upward like a path winding around a mountain. As the pyramid grows taller, the ramp grows with it, always hugging the pyramid's sides. This solves the length problem. The ramp can maintain a constant, manageable grade while reaching any height, and it uses the pyramid itself as support, reducing the amount of material needed for the ramp. Some archaeological evidence supports this idea. Stone fragments showing traces of what might be ramp surfaces have been found on the Giza Plateau. And from a practical standpoint, a spiral ramp makes considerable sense for much of the pyramid's height. But a spiral ramp has its own challenges. It would cover the pyramid's sides, making it difficult to check the accuracy of the corners and faces as construction proceeded. And as the pyramid narrows toward the top, the spiral ramp would have less and less room to make its turns. Perhaps the solution combined approaches spiral ramps for the middle sections with other methods for the beginning and end of construction. Internal ramps. Here's a theory that has gained attention in recent years. What if some ramps were built inside the pyramid itself? French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin has proposed that the Great Pyramid contains an internal spiral ramp running through the interior of the structure. This ramp would have been used to haul blocks for the upper portions of the pyramid, and then sealed within the structure when construction was complete. This is an elegant solution that would explain several mysteries. And, fascinatingly, in 2017, scientists used cosmic ray muon imaging, a technique that can see through solid stone, by detecting naturally occurring particles from space, and discovered what appears to be a large void within the Great Pyramid. Could this be evidence of an internal ramp system? The debate continues. What's important for our purposes tonight is not which theory is correct. Archaeologists and engineers are still working on this puzzle, but rather the understanding that the ancient builders were sophisticated problem solvers who likely used multiple methods, adapting their approach as the pyramid rose higher. Chapter 9. The Rhythm of Work. Let us return to the human level, to the daily experience of building, because regardless of the specific methods used, the pyramid was built by people, thousands of them, working in coordinated teams over many years. The workforce was organized with remarkable sophistication. We know this from archaeological discoveries at the workers' village near the pyramids, from inscriptions, and from the organization evident in the structure itself. Workers were divided into large groups, which Egyptologists sometimes call gangs, though that word carries unfortunate connotations. These groups might number several thousand men each, and were further divided into smaller teams of perhaps 200 workers, which were in turn divided into 10 or 20-man crews. This hierarchical organization meant that orders could flow down from the architect and chief overseers to individual work crews efficiently. It also meant that crews could specialize, some cutting stone, others hauling, others setting blocks, still others preparing mortar or managing logistics. The work followed seasonal patterns. During the Nile's annual flood season, roughly July through October, when the river inundated the farmland, agricultural work was impossible. This was when large numbers of workers could be mobilized for the pyramid project. When the floods receded and planting season began, many would return to their fields, leaving a smaller core workforce to continue through the agricultural year. Imagine the cycle. The river rising, workers arriving from up and down the Nile Valley, the building site becoming a hive of activity. Then, months later, the river receding, workers returning home, the pace slowing but never stopping. Year after year, flood season after flood season, the pyramid rising incrementally skyward. The workers lived in a specially built village, not squalid slave quarters, but a properly planned community with street grids, housing, bakeries, breweries, and workshops. Archaeologists have excavated these villages and found evidence of relatively good diets, including meat, which was not common among ordinary Egyptians. Workers received medical care. We have found skeletons with healed fractures, suggesting they had access to competent physicians. There were accidents, of course. Any major construction project involves risk, and we have found skeletons showing crushing injuries consistent with stonework. But the evidence suggests a community that took care of its workers, recognizing that they were valuable, that their skill and experience mattered. At the end of each day, as the sun settled toward the western desert, the work would gradually cease. The sound of copper on stone, rope against wood, voices calling instructions, all of it would fade. Workers would return to their village, to meals of bread and beer, to stories told in the fading light, to sleep beneath the stars. And the pyramid, incomplete but growing, would stand silent through the night, waiting for morning. Chapter 10. The Casing Stones. As the pyramid rose toward its intended height, another process was happening concurrently, one that would ultimately transform the stepped mass of the core blocks into the smooth, gleaming monument that the pharaoh envisioned. The casing stones, the outer layer of fine, white limestone that would cover the pyramid's sides, came from different quarries than the core blocks. While the core used local stone from the Giza Plateau itself, the casing required higher quality limestone from Tura on the eastern bank of the Nile, about 13 kilometers upstream. Tura limestone is special. It's fine-grained, almost crystalline, with fewer inclusions and flaws than the local stone. When freshly cut and polished, it has a brilliant white surface that reflects sunlight intensely. This was the stone that would make the pyramid not just enormous, but beautiful, a mountain of light visible from miles across the Nile Valley. The logistics of bringing these casing stones were more complex than for core blocks. They had to be cut at Tura, transported to the Nile, loaded onto boats, floated downstream to Giza, unloaded, and then hauled to the construction site. Each of these steps required planning, labor, and expertise. The Nile itself was a highway, Egypt's most important transportation route. During the flood season, when the river was high, boats could come much closer to the Giza Plateau. A canal probably connected the floodplain to a harbor near the building site, reducing the overland hauling distance. Picture these boats. Sturdy wooden vessels, perhaps 20 or 30 meters long, their decks loaded with carefully positioned limestone blocks. The boats would ride low in the water, weighted with their cargo of stone. Experienced crews would pole them along in the shallows or use the current and simple sail arrangements in deeper water. The sight would have been impressive, dozens of boats moving slowly up and down the river, each carrying stone for the eternal resting place of the god king. The logistics alone represent an achievement. Coordinating quarrying at Tura with transportation schedules and building progress at Giza, ensuring stones arrived when and where they were needed, managing the labor force at multiple sites simultaneously. When the casing stones arrived at the building site, they received special treatment. Unlike core blocks, which could be roughly rectangular and were often left with unfinished surfaces, casing stones needed to be precisely cut to specific angles. The angle of the Great Pyramid's faces is approximately 51 degrees. 50 minutes, a specific choice that may relate to mathematical or symbolic considerations. Each casing stone, therefore, needed to have one face cut to precisely this angle, so that when installed, all the casing stones together would create a smooth, continuous slope. The precision achieved in cutting these stones is remarkable. When casing stones have been measured, many were removed long after the pyramid's completion and used for other building projects in Cairo, but some remain. The angles are accurate to small fractions of a degree. The surfaces are flat and smooth to within millimeters. How did they achieve this precision with copper tools and no modern measuring instruments? The answer lies in careful technique and quality control. After rough cutting a block to approximately the right shape and size, stoneworkers would use specialized tools to create a smooth, flat surface. One method involved using a larger, very flat master stone as a reference surface. The stone being worked would be rubbed against the master stone with abrasive sand between them. High spots on the working stone would be revealed by scratches or marks, and these could be carefully chiseled down. The process would repeat until the entire surface made even contact with the master stone. For checking angles, simple wooden templates would work triangles cut to the desired pyramid face angle that could be held against the stone to check accuracy. Any deviation could be marked and corrected. This was slow work. A single casing stone might take many days to prepare properly, but remember, precision here mattered enormously. Errors would be visible in the final structure. Gaps between stones would mar the surface, and worst of all, imprecise angles would cause the faces to deviate from their intended slope, potentially creating structural problems as the pyramid rose higher. So the work proceeded slowly, carefully. Workers who specialized in finishing casing stones were probably among the most skilled and experienced, their expertise honed over years of practice. They worked by eye and by feel, developing an intimate understanding of the stone and how to shape it. As each casing stone was completed, it would be marked probably with red ochre paint to indicate which course it belonged to and where on that course it should be placed. Then it would be moved into position, ready for installation. Chapter 11. Setting the casing. Installing a casing stone was more complex than setting a core block. The casing stones needed to fit together with minimal gaps, creating an almost seamless surface. And they needed to be positioned at their precise angle, while also aligning horizontally with the other stones in their course. The process likely began with the core blocks. A course of core stones would be laid and leveled, then, working from the corners inward, because the corners were critical reference points, casing stones would be positioned. Here's where the process becomes interesting. The casing stones were not set in their final position and then somehow adjusted to achieve the right angles and fit. Instead, they were set slightly proud of their final position, projecting outward slightly beyond where they would ultimately sit. You might wonder why. The answer relates to accuracy and adjustability. By leaving the stones projecting slightly, workers retained the ability to make fine adjustments to the angles and surfaces after the stones were in place, and the overall geometry of the pyramid course could be checked. Once a course of casing stones was complete, teams of skilled masons would work across the surface, carefully trimming and smoothing it. They would use string lines stretched from corner to corner to establish the intended face angle. Any stone that projected beyond this line would be carefully cut back using copper chisels and saws. The cutting would proceed gradually across the face of each stone. The masons would work from top to bottom on each course, creating a smooth, continuous surface. Stone chips and dust would accumulate at the base of the pyramid. Archaeological excavations have found deep layers of limestone chips around the pyramid's base, evidence of this finishing work. Between the casing stones, the joints were filled with a thin layer of mortar, not structural mortar in the modern sense, but rather a fine gypsum plaster that helped seal the joints and could be worked to create almost invisible seams. This mortar was often less than a millimeter thick, requiring nearly perfect fit between stones. The result, when a section of casing was complete, was a smooth, white surface, angled precisely at 51 degrees, 50 minutes. When the sun struck this surface, the reflection would be intense. The pyramid would gleam like a beacon. Some ancient accounts describe the pyramid as being so bright it was difficult to look at directly at midday. While we must be cautious with ancient sources written long after the pyramid's construction, the description makes sense. Fresh limestone, polished smooth, would indeed create a brilliant reflection. Imagine standing at the base of the pyramid as evening approached, the setting sun striking the western face. The stone would glow golden, then deepen to orange, then fade to purple-gray as the sun disappeared beyond the western desert. In the gathering darkness, the pyramid would become a massive presence, a shadow against the stars, still faintly visible as a geometric perfection imposed upon the natural landscape. The workers would see this transformation every evening as they concluded their day's labor. It must have been both beautiful and deeply satisfying, visible proof that their work was creating something extraordinary. Chapter 12. The Pyramidion. As the pyramid approached its final height, the work became increasingly challenging. The working surface at the top was now quite small, perhaps only a few dozen meters square. The amount of material to be lifted had not decreased, but the space available to maneuver it had shrunk dramatically. Fewer workers could fit at the top, which meant that operations had to be carefully coordinated. Blocks had to arrive at exactly the right time. Too many arriving simultaneously would create congestion, while too few would mean workers standing idle. The logistics resembled a complex ballet, with movements choreographed to keep work flowing smoothly despite the constraints. And finally, at last, the pyramid was nearly complete. One last element remained: the pyramidion, the capstone that would crown the structure. The pyramidion was special. While we don't have the Great Pyramid's original capstone, it was probably removed or destroyed long ago. We have pyramidions from other pyramids, and we know they received special treatment. Some were covered in electrum, an alloy of gold and silver, which would catch the first rays of sunrise and the last light of sunset, making the pyramid's apex shine like a star. The symbolism was profound. The pyramidion represented the Benbin, the primordial mound that, in Egyptian mythology, first emerged from the waters of chaos at the creation of the world. By placing this symbol atop the pyramid, the structure became a kind of frozen sunrise, a permanent connection between earth and sky, between the mortal remains of the pharaoh below and his divine destiny above. Lifting the pyramidion into position would have been a significant engineering challenge. It was probably a single stone weighing several tons, and it had to be placed precisely at the apex of the pyramid, where even small positioning errors would be glaringly obvious. We can imagine the final days, the last few courses being completed, the working platform at the top being prepared, and then, perhaps on a day chosen for its auspicious significance in the Egyptian calendar, the pyramidion beginning its ascent. If internal ramps existed, they might have been used for this final lift, or perhaps an elaborate system of levers and supports was built on the small platform at the top. However it was accomplished, the moment when the pyramidion settled into place must have been profoundly significant, not just technically, marking the completion of decades of work, but also spiritually and symbolically. When the pyramidion was secured, when its angles had been checked and its position verified, the structural work was complete. The pyramid stood at its full height, all 146 meters of it, the tallest human-made structure in the world, a title it would hold for over 3,800 years. Chapter 13. The Finishing. But the work was not quite done. The pyramid stood complete structurally, but the casing stones still needed their final finishing. Remember how they had been left projecting slightly outward? Now came the final process, cutting and polishing the entire exterior surface to create the smooth, brilliant finish that would make the pyramid not just enormous, but beautiful. This finishing work proceeded from top to bottom, a logical approach, since stone chips and dust would fall downward, and there was no point in finishing lower courses while work continued above them. Teams of skilled masons worked their way down the pyramid faces, moving slowly, carefully. They used string lines stretched from the pyramidion to the corners at the pyramid's base, creating references for the intended face angle. Then, working systematically, they would trim each casing stone to match this reference line. The cutting was done with copper saws and chisels, supplemented by abrasive sand for the final smoothing. A saw cut in soft limestone could proceed fairly quickly, but the work still took time. Each face of the pyramid covered approximately 22,000 square meters. Even with hundreds of masons working, the finishing must have taken months or even years. As the masons worked their way down each face, the pyramid's appearance would gradually transform. The stepped, rough appearance of the core and unfinished casing would give way to smooth, brilliant white surfaces. The transformation would be visible from across the Nile Valley. Those watching could see the pyramid emerging in its final form, course by course, as the finishing work descended. The gaps between casing stones were filled with fine gypsum mortar, worked smooth so that the joints became nearly invisible. In some places, the fit was so precise that it's difficult to insert even a thin blade between the stones. The masons of ancient Egypt had achieved a level of precision that would be impressive in any era. When the last course at the pyramid's base was finished, when the last joint was filled and smoothed, when the workers stepped back to view the complete structure for the first time, what must that moment have been like? The pyramid would have been extraordinary. A man-made mountain with mathematically perfect geometry, its white limestone surface gleaming in the Egyptian sun. Its scale almost incomprehensible. The sheer size would have been overwhelming. You could not see the entire structure from nearby. You had to walk substantial distances to really comprehend its full extent. And this was not the only pyramid at Giza. By the time the Great Pyramid was complete, or shortly thereafter, two more would join it. Khafre's pyramid, slightly smaller but built on higher ground, so its apex reaches nearly the same elevation, and Menkaura's pyramid, smaller still, but built to the same exacting standards. Together, these three monuments dominated the Giza Plateau, a statement of power, divine connection, and technical mastery that still resonates today. Chapter 14: The Ramp's Removal. With the pyramid complete, one major task remained: removing the construction ramps. If the ramps had been external, spiraling around the pyramid's sides or projecting outward from its faces, they now covered much of the finished casing work. The ramps had to come down, and this process had to be done carefully to avoid damaging the precisely finished surfaces beneath. The ramp material, mud, brick, rubble, sand, and whatever wooden supports had been used was probably salvaged where possible. Wood was valuable in Egypt, where forests were scarce. Mud brick could be broken down and the material reused. Even sand and rubble could be useful for other construction projects. The removal probably proceeded from top to bottom, the reverse of construction. As workers dismantled the upper portions of the ramp system, the material could be carried down the ramps themselves, making the work easier. Gradually, the ramps would descend and diminish, revealing more and more of the pyramid's finished casing. Finally, the last of the ramp material would be cleared away from the pyramid's base. The surrounding area would be cleaned, loose chips of limestone removed, the ground leveled and prepared for the final elements of the complex: the causeway leading to the Valley Temple, the smaller Queen's Pyramids, the boat pits, and all the other structures that formed part of the complete funerary complex. And then, at last, the work was truly done. Chapter 15: The Community of Builders. As we approach the end of our journey tonight, let us think not about stones and angles and engineering, but about people. The pyramid was built by human hands. This is worth emphasizing because ancient structures can seem so improbable that it's tempting to invoke mystery or even pseudoscience to explain them. But the evidence is clear. The pyramids were built by skilled workers, organized in an efficient labor system. Using simple but cleverly applied tools and techniques, these workers were not slaves in chains, driven by cruelty. The archaeological evidence contradicts this notion thoroughly. They were paid workers. many of them seasonal laborers fulfilling their service obligation to the state during the Nile's flood season when agricultural work was impossible. They received food rations, good quality rations including bread, beer, meat, and vegetables. They lived in planned worker villages with decent housing. They received medical care. Their grave sites show they were buried with respect, sometimes with inscriptions noting their role in the pyramid's construction. Some workers were permanently employed skilled stonemasons, carpenters, metalsmiths, and supervisors whose expertise was too valuable to be seasonal. These workers and their families formed stable communities around the building site. Children would have grown up in the shadow of the rising pyramid, watching it grow year by year, perhaps learning the trades that would one day employ them in similar projects. The work was hard, certainly. Moving millions of tons of stone by human power is inherently difficult and dangerous. Accidents happened, but the work was also meaningful. The workers were creating something they believed would endure forever, and they were right. They were ensuring the pharaoh's successful transition to the afterlife, which, in their religious framework, helped maintain cosmic order and ensured the continued prosperity of Egypt. Some workers left their marks literally. Graffiti found inside the Great Pyramid in spaces that were sealed before construction was complete includes notes about which gang performed, which work crew names, and occasional comments. These marks are a direct connection across 4 millennia to the individuals who built the pyramid, and they reveal a sense of pride and identity. The Friends of Khufu gang, says one inscription. These workers identified themselves by their association with the project. It mattered to them. Their work on the pyramid was significant enough that they wanted to record it, even in places no one else would see. Think of them as real people. A young man learning stone cutting from his father, gradually developing the eye and skill needed for precision work. An experienced foreman who knew exactly how to position a hauling team for maximum efficiency. A woman? Yes. Women worked on these projects too, particularly in support roles like food preparation, baking the bread that would feed hundreds of workers, an engineer solving problems on the fly, adapting techniques to unexpected challenges. These people lived, loved, raised children, told stories, sang songs, laughed, argued, grew old, and together they built something impossible. Impossible, not because it couldn't be done, clearly it could and was, but impossible in scale, in precision, in its sheer audacious ambition. Chapter 16, The Mystery of Precision. There's one aspect of the Great Pyramid that we haven't fully addressed, and it's one that continues to generate discussion: the remarkable precision evident in the structure's dimensions and alignment. The pyramid's 4 sides are almost exactly equal in length, varying by less than 20 centimeters out of 230 meters, a difference of less than 0.1%. The base is almost perfectly level, with the southeast corner only about 1.3 centimeters higher than the northwest corner. The sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an error of only about 3 arc minutes, 1/20th of a degree, for a structure built over 4,000 years ago, without computers, without magnetic compasses, without telescopes. This precision is remarkable. How was it achieved? For leveling, we've already discussed the probable use of water-filled channels. Water naturally finds a level surface, providing a reliable reference. By carefully measuring up from water level at various points across the foundation, the engineers could establish a level plane with considerable accuracy. For alignment to the cardinal directions, the method was probably astronomical. The ancient Egyptians were keen observers of the sky, and they had several methods available for determining true north. One method would use the stars. By observing the rising and setting points of a particular star, or by tracking the apparent rotation of circumpolar stars around the celestial North Pole, observers could establish a north-south line with good accuracy. Some researchers suggest they may have used a technique involving a circular wall and careful observations of star positions, which could achieve the precision evident in the pyramid's alignment. The sun could also be used. At noon, when the sun crosses the meridian, it's due south in the northern hemisphere. By tracking the shadow cast by a vertical pole, a gnomon, and marking the shadow's tip at equal time intervals before and after noon, observers could establish an east-west line. The perpendicular to this line would be north-south. For measuring lengths and angles, the Egyptians used units based on the human body cubits, approximately the length from elbow to fingertip, palms, and digits. A royal cubit was subdivided into 7 palms, each of 4 digits, giving 28 digits per cubit, or roughly 52.4 centimeters. With careful attention to their measuring rods, which were probably calibrated against master standards held in temples or government buildings, the builders could achieve consistent measurements across the entire project. For establishing right angles critical at the pyramid's corners, the Egyptians knew techniques still used today. A 3-4-5 triangle always has a right angle, a relationship that works with any measurement system. By carefully measuring out these proportions using ropes or wooden rods, they could establish perfect right angles. So while the precision is impressive, it's not inexplicable. It required careful measurement, constant checking, astronomical observations, and skillful application of mathematical principles the Egyptians understood well. It required patience, the willingness to measure and remeasure, to make adjustments when errors were detected, to maintain standards across years of construction. In a way, this makes the achievement even more impressive. The precision wasn't achieved through some lost technology or mysterious technique. It was achieved through careful, patient work, through attention to detail, through building a system of measurement and checking that ensured accuracy at every stage. The pyramid stands as a testament, not to mystery, but to human capability, to what can be accomplished when knowledge, skill, organization, and persistence are applied to an ambitious goal. Chapter 17. The Interior Passages. While we've focused primarily on the visible structure, the raising of millions of tons of stone, the Great Pyramid also contains interior passages and chambers that present their own engineering challenges. These interior spaces were not an afterthought. They were planned from the beginning and had to be incorporated into the structure as it rose. The pyramid contains several passages. The main entrance, on the north face, about 17 meters above ground level, leads to a descending passage that slopes downward at about 26 degrees, cutting first through the pyramid's masonry and then through the bedrock beneath, eventually reaching an unfinished chamber carved into the rock below the pyramid. From this descending passage, an ascending passage branches upward, climbing at the same 26-degree angle but in the opposite direction. This passage is notable for its tight dimensions, about 1.2 meters high and 1 meter wide, requiring anyone traversing it to stoop or crawl. The ascending passage leads to 2 significant features: the Grand Gallery and the Queen's Chamber. A misnomer, it was never intended for a queen. The Grand Gallery is extraordinary, a passage nearly 47 meters long and over 8 meters high, with a corbelled ceiling where stone courses overlap, each projecting slightly inward from the course below, eventually meeting at the top. This architectural technique allows the creation of a high ceiling without using arches, which require a keystone. The precision with which the Grand Gallery walls constructed, the sides are straight and parallel. The corbelled ceiling is regular and carefully executed is remarkable. At the top of the Grand Gallery lies the entrance to the King's Chamber, the pyramid's primary burial chamber. This room is approximately 10 by 5 meters and just over 5 meters high. The walls are made of enormous red granite blocks brought from Aswan, over 800 kilometers upstream, a staggering logistics feat in itself. The King's Chamber ceiling deserves special mention. It's not a simple flat ceiling, but rather a complex structure consisting of 9 huge granite beams, each weighing approximately 50 tons, spanning the chamber width. Above these beams are 5 relieving chambers. spaces between successive layers of granite blocks that distribute the weight of the pyramid above, preventing it from crushing the king's chamber ceiling. The uppermost of these relieving chambers has a pointed roof made of enormous limestone blocks leaning against each other, a primitive arch form that channels the weight outward and downward. This system has worked perfectly for over 4,000 years. The king's chamber remains intact despite supporting thousands of tons of stone above it. The question of how these massive granite blocks, particularly the 50-ton ceiling beams, were maneuvered through the narrow passages and positioned in the king's chamber has puzzled researchers. It would be almost impossible to bring them up the ascending passage given its dimensions. The solution was probably that these elements were positioned as the pyramid was being built. The chamber was built course by course along with the rest of the pyramid. The granite blocks could be slid into position from above, maneuvered across the chamber floor as it was being constructed, and then built over as the pyramid rose higher. This means the construction process was even more complex than simply stacking blocks. The builders had to coordinate the external construction, raising the pyramid course by course with the internal construction of passages and chambers. They had to leave passages open at the right heights, install massive granite beams at exactly the right moments, build the corbelled ceiling of the grand gallery as the pyramid rose around it, all while maintaining the overall alignment and structural integrity of the monument. It's like building a complex three-dimensional puzzle while simultaneously constructing the box that contains it. Chapter 18: The Ceiling. Once the pharaoh's burial had taken place and the pyramid was ready to be sealed, workers had to secure the passages against future intrusion. This was accomplished using huge granite blocks called portcullis stones that had been positioned in the passages during construction. In the ascending passage, 3 granite plugs, each weighing several tons, had been stored in the grand gallery during construction. After the funeral, these plugs were released and slid down the ascending passage, effectively blocking it. Once in place, they would be extremely difficult to move from below their weight, and the narrow confines of the passage made them almost impossible to extract. The entrance itself was sealed with a stone plug, and then concealed beneath the pyramid's smooth casing. When complete and sealed, the pyramid would have appeared to be a solid mass of stone with no obvious entry point. Of course, these measures didn't prevent looting robbers eventually found ways in, probably through tunneling, but they did make unauthorized entry difficult and time-consuming. The psychology of this is interesting. The pyramids were built to last forever, to protect the pharaoh's body and possessions for eternity. Enormous effort went into making them secure. Yet, at some level, the builders must have known that no security system is perfect, that determined intruders with enough time and tools could probably find a way in eventually. But that wasn't the point, really. The pyramid was a statement about the pharaoh's power, about the state's organizational capacity, about Egypt's ability to undertake and complete projects of staggering ambition. The pyramid itself, its sheer existence, was the message. Whether robbers eventually breached, it was almost beside the point. The pyramid had already served its purpose simply by being built. Epilogue: The Long Sleep. And now, dear listener, as we reach the end of our journey tonight, let us imagine one final scene. It is dawn, some months or years after the pyramid's completion. The last workers departed yesterday, tools gathered, temporary structures dismantled, the site cleaned and prepared for the priests who will maintain the cult of the deceased pharaoh. The 3 pyramids of Giza stand against the lightening sky, their white limestone surfaces beginning to glow as the sun rises over the eastern desert. The structures are so precise, so geometrically perfect, that they seem almost unreal, like mathematical concepts made solid, ideas given form in stone. Around the pyramids, the desert is returning to its natural state. The ramps are gone, their material carried away. The workers' village is empty. Families return to their homes along the Nile. The quarries are quiet, no longer ringing with the sound of copper on stone. The pyramids stand alone now, as they were meant to. They need no further human attention. They are complete, fulfilled, ready for eternity. A desert fox trots across the sand, pausing to glance at these strange mountains before continuing its morning hunt. The wind, which never stops in the desert, whispers across the stone surfaces, carrying with it the scent of the Nile and the distant barking of dogs from a village miles away. Inside the Great Pyramid, in the king's chamber, the pharaoh rests in his granite sarcophagus, surrounded by treasures, protected by thousands of tons of carefully placed stone, sealed away from the world of the living. His journey to the afterlife has begun, and the pyramid, the eternal horizon, will mark his place for as long as the sun rises. The sun climbs higher. The shadows shorten. Another day begins in Egypt, as days have begun here, since time immemorial. But something is different now. Where there was once only desert plateau, there now stand 3 monuments that will outlast empires, dynasties, languages, and entire civilizations. They will stand when Egypt itself is conquered by Assyrians, then Persians, then Greeks, then Romans. They will stand when Egypt's ancient language is forgotten and its gods abandoned. They will stand when new religions and new empires rise and fall. They will stand for over 4,000 years, until the present day, where they continue to stand, a little worn by time but fundamentally unchanged. And they will teach future generations, teach us something important about what humans can accomplish when we combine skill, knowledge, organization, and patience. When we're willing to work stone by stone, block by block, course by course, year after year, towards something greater than ourselves. The pyramids whisper a truth across the millennia, that great things are rarely accomplished quickly, that precision matters, that patience is a virtue, and that sometimes the most important achievements are those that outlast their creators, speaking silently to generations unborn when the work began. As you drift now towards sleep, let yourself feel the solidity of the pyramid, the patience of its construction. Let the rhythm of work songs echo in your mind, the steady, measured pace of copper on stone, wood on sand, breath by breath, block by block. The workers who built the pyramid knew about patience. They knew that great accomplishments happen slowly, through persistent effort applied steadily over time. They knew that today's stone, properly placed, becomes part of tomorrow's monument. Rest now, as they rested at the end of their workday, satisfied with honest labor, proud of their contribution to something lasting and important. The pyramid stands in the darkness, patient and eternal, and will stand through tonight and countless nights to come. Sleep well,